There's a trophy in my hallway closet. Bowling League, 1987. I haven't looked at it in maybe 15 years. And the strange thing is, I couldn't tell you why I kept it that long in the first place. When I was younger, I thought happiness came from adding things to my life. More money, more approval, a house that looked a certain way when people pulled into the driveway. At 82, I've come to believe something almost the opposite. Happiness showed up the moment I stopped carrying things I was never supposed to carry in the first place. Let me explain what I mean. Not all at once. It came to me in pieces, over years, the way most true things do. I used to worry constantly about what people thought of me. Not in some dramatic way, just quietly, underneath everything. I remember a dinner party, must have been 1974 or so. My wife Dorothy spent 2 days cooking. I wore a tie I hated, and the whole evening I kept watching people's faces, trying to read whether they were impressed, whether the house looked successful enough, whether I sounded smart when I talked about my work. Years later, I asked Dorothy if she remembered that dinner. She laughed and said, "Which one?" That's when it hit me. I had spent an entire evening performing for people who couldn't even recall it a decade on. I wonder now how many evenings I did that. How many years, really, spent rehearsing a version of myself for an audience that was mostly thinking about their own dinner, their own ties, their own worries. Nobody tells you this when you're 40. People are not thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. They're too busy worrying whether you're thinking about them. The day I really understood that, something in my chest loosened. I didn't become careless. I just stopped auditioning. There's another one, winning arguments. Lord, I was good at it. I could win an argument with anybody. My brother, my co-workers, especially Dorothy. I had a memory for details and I used it like a weapon. I'd bring up something she said 3 years earlier just to prove a point in the middle of a fight about dishes. I won a lot of arguments in my 40s. I couldn't tell you what most of them were about now, but I remember the silence afterward. The kind where you've technically won and the room still feels colder than before you opened your mouth. It took me embarrassingly long to understand that being right and being good to live with are two completely different things. Dorothy used to say, "You can be right, Arthur, or you can be married. Pick one tonight." I laughed at that for years before I actually heard it. Somewhere in my 60s, I just stopped. Stopped needing the last word. Stopped correcting people at dinner tables over things that didn't matter. My son still brings up politics sometimes, trying to get a rise out of me. I just nod and ask if he wants more potatoes. Peace got to be worth more to me than being correct. I wish someone had told me that at 30. Might have saved a few friendships. Might have saved some years with people who aren't around anymore to make it up to. Then there was the matter of looking successful. I bought a boat once, used it 4 times. 4! I remember standing in the driveway looking at it, knowing full well I didn't even like fishing all that much, and asking myself why exactly I'd spent that kind of money. The honest answer, if I'm being honest with you now, is that a man down the street had one, and something in me couldn't stand the comparison. That's a hard thing to admit at my age, that I let a stranger's driveway dictate my decisions for a while there. But I think a lot of men my generation did. We were taught success had a look to it, a car, a lawn, a certain kind of watch. Nobody taught us that comfort and appearance are not the same animal at all. These days I drive a truck that's older than my grandson. It rattles a bit on the highway. I don't think about it twice. The boat's long gone, sold it at a loss, and I remember feeling relieved, not disappointed, when the man drove off with it. That told me something. Now here's the one that took the longest to understand, and maybe matters the most. Being useful. For most of my life, I knew exactly who I was because somebody needed something from me. My kids needed rides, money, advice. My company needed me at a desk by 7. Dorothy needed someone to fix the gutter, balance the checkbook, carry the heavy boxes. Then I retired. And about 3 months in, I remember sitting in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning with nothing on the calendar, no phone calls waiting, nobody needing anything from me at all, and I felt something close to panic. Not boredom, panic. Like I'd been quietly erased. I asked myself a question I'd never had the nerve to ask before. Who am I exactly, when nobody needs anything from me today? It took a long while to sit with that one. I didn't like the silence at first. I filled it with errands I didn't need to run, projects around the house that didn't need doing, anything to avoid the question. But eventually, and I mean eventually, this wasn't some quick revelation. I started to understand that my worth was never actually tied to my usefulness. It only felt that way because usefulness was the only language I'd been taught to measure myself in. Now I sit on the porch some mornings doing absolutely nothing, watching birds fight over the feeder, and I don't feel erased anymore. I feel like I'm finally just here, present, without an invoice attached. I spent a lot of years trying to please people too, saying yes when I meant no, driving across town for favors I resented the whole way there, helping my brother move 3 separate times, secretly hoping he'd notice the sacrifice, that he'd say something. He never did. Why would he? I never told him I minded. That's the part nobody warns you about. Kindness without any boundaries doesn't stay kindness forever. Eventually, it curdles into something quieter and uglier. Resentment that you can't even justify because on paper, you offered. Nobody made you. I stopped doing that somewhere along the way too. Started saying, I can't this weekend, without an excuse trailing behind it. The first few times felt like I was committing some kind of crime. Nobody arrested me. Most people just said, okay, no problem, and went on with their day. All those years of guilt, and it turned out the door wasn't even locked. I also stopped fighting things I never had any control over in the first place. The weather. My daughter's choices in men. God help me, that one took years. The news. Other people's opinions about how I should be living this last stretch of my life. My own aging body, which doesn't take instructions from me the way it used to. I think a great deal of the exhaustion I carried in my 50s and 60s wasn't really about the things themselves. It was about refusing to accept that some doors were simply closed to me. Once I stopped pushing on those doors, I found I had a surprising amount of energy left over for the ones that were actually open. And then there's the last one, the one that took the longest and maybe hurt the most to let go of. I was afraid of growing old for most of my adult life, afraid of the wrinkles, afraid of slowing down, afraid of becoming the man people talk slowly to in waiting rooms. I remember turning 50 and feeling something close to dread, like a door was closing somewhere down a hallway I couldn't see. But I'm 82 now, and here's the strange part nobody quite prepares you for. Growing old didn't steal my life the way I feared it would. It revealed what was actually in it the whole time. I notice sunlight on the kitchen table now in a way I never did at 40. I let my coffee go cold sometimes, just watching it move across the wood. I stood in front of an old photograph of Dorothy last spring, the one from our trip to the coast, and instead of that familiar ache, I found myself smiling, just smiling, like she'd walked into the room for a moment. I fold laundry slowly now, no reason to rush. My grandson visited 2 weekends ago, and when his mother's car pulled out of the driveway, I stood on the porch a long while after the taillights disappeared, and it didn't feel like loss. It felt full somehow, like something had been deposited rather than taken. People think aging is mostly about losing things, and I won't pretend it isn't. Some of that loss is real, and it's heavy. But I've come to believe it's also a kind of release. You get gently relieved of burdens you were never actually built to carry forever. The need to impress strangers, the need to win, the need to look a certain way in a driveway, the need to be needed every single hour of every single day. I used to think happiness meant holding on tighter, working harder, achieving more, gripping every relationship and every reputation like it might slip away if I loosened my hand for even a second. Now I think maybe it's the opposite. Maybe happiness was always just on the other side of opening your hands. I still think about that bowling trophy sometimes, sitting in the dark of that closet. I should probably throw it out one of these days, or maybe I'll just leave it there. Proof that a man can hold on to something for 30 years and still, eventually, learn to let it mean nothing at all.